I think we can all agree when I say that John Lennon is an absolute legend, one of the most important songwriters ever, an amazing singer, a key element of the greatest discography of all time, and the protagonist of today's video. Because today we're going to be ranking his entire solo discography from worst to best, and I have to say that I'm really excited. John Lennon is one of my favorite artists of all time, not only because of his work with the Beatles, but in his solo discography, you'll find some of my favorite albums ever. So I'm really excited to see what this list is going to look like. This video gave me a really good excuse to go back to his albums and enjoy them once again, and you know, it was a good and bad experience because some of his albums are quite insufferable. You know, listening to his entire discography was not the way I wanted to spend my weekend, but yeah. Before we get into the actual video though, a few rules must be set on stone. First of all, we're not going to be counting any live releases, so Live Piece in Toronto, or any live segments in studio albums like you see in Sometime in New York City, where the entirety of the second disc contains live performances of songs like Cold Turkey, for example. That is not going to be considered when ranking the albums on the list. Also, I'm not going to be counting the Unfinished Trilogy, guys, and I'm doing you a big favor because these are some of the worst albums ever made. Like, if you want to listen to Yoko Ono screaming for 44 minutes, then be my guest, you know, do whatever you want with your time, but I'm not gonna listen to those albums again. I've been listening to those albums so much more than I need to for videos I've done in the past, and every time I listen to those records again, I try to find something interesting, I try to find something groundbreaking or innovative, and I find nothing. I find two people with too much time and, you know, a lot of money to waste on the studio. So that is the reason why I'm not going to be counting any of those albums. But if you want to know my opinion on them, they're terrible. They're awful pieces of avant-garde music, they're not a good representation of the genre, and they have very little impact in John Lennon as a songwriter, so they're not even important, you know. So if you want to listen to this, help yourself, you know, you're special, you're weird, you're not like the others. Also, guys, because we're talking about one of the most popular humans in the history of humanity, I'm pretty sure everyone's gonna have a different list, different opinion, so why don't you go ahead, make your own list and leave it down below so we can all take a look at your list, you know, your opinion on John Lennon's discography, instead of being grumpy and insulting me, because apparently that's what a lot of you like to do. We have 8 albums to go through. This is not gonna be a short video, so let's go on with number 8. Putting Sometime in New York City at number 8 is just expected, you know. Everyone knew this album was going to be here, and even though I hate being predictable, I just have to do it, because if I put any other album here, I wouldn't be honest with myself. This has some of the worst production, songwriting, and lyricism in John Lennon's career, you know, and Yoko doesn't really help at all, because even though she does have some decent songs in here like Born in a Prison and, you know, Angela, for example, I like the melodies of those songs. I don't think they're great, but compared to some of the other work by Yoko Ono, I feel like, you know, it's an improvement. Even though this album had the potential of being at least a decent release, you know, with songs like Attic Estate, New York City, Sunday Bloody Sunday, John Sinclair, songs that have a good melody and that could potentially be good rock and roll songs, the lyrics are so stupid and so childish, you know. They try to be political, but they come across as stupid and unaware of, you know, how big the issue they're talking about is, because this is basically an album about politics. It talks about racism, incarceration, sexism as well. In the track Woman is the N-word of the world. Some of the most outrageous comments were made in this album too, you know, and if it weren't for all the political charge this album has, it would be way more enjoyable. It's not that I have anything against political albums, it's just that the way it's approached in this one, it's really bad. I'm probably gonna put some lyrics as I'm saying this so you guys can understand why this album is so hated by the entirety of John Lennon's fan base, basically, because instrumental wise it's not very different from albums like Plastic Ono Band and Imagine, but once you dive deep into the lyrical content, you know, and what they were trying to do with this album, that's where it gets dark. Because once again, Born in Prison and Angela are not my least favorite Yoko Ono songs. I think the performances in both tracks is quite decent. Then you have an amazing rocker with New York City, blues like guitar playing and John Sinclair. There's a lot of elements that could have made this album better, but the production was horrible. horrible. Everything sounds sharp and unorganized. The melodies, they in songs like Attica State, they're not even singing the song in the same tempo, which makes the whole thing sound horrible. So yeah, you have decent ideas that were turned into terrible songs, either because of how political they were and the political takes that were made in them. One of the best examples is the track Roll Water, where the lyrics are almost laughable, and then of course in between the lyrics, as some sort of chorus, you have Yoko Ono's signature screaming sound that sounds more like a dolphin dying. That makes this album one of the least enjoyable moments in John Lennon's career, and it goes to show that politics ruin everything, including music. Alright, so next up at number 7 we have Rock and Roll, and it pains me to put this album so low on the list because I do enjoy a fair share of the songs in this album. Stand By Me obviously being the best example of a cover song done right in your own style with your own type of instrumentation and performance. You have the song You Can't Catch Me by Chuck Berry, and it's funny the way he decided to perform this song, really similar to what he did with Come Together, because at the time a lot of people were saying that John Lennon copied Chuck Berry, but you also have Ain't That a Shame, which is probably the song of the album I enjoy the most. Do You Want to Dance, Bring It On Home, Peggy Sue, a very good cover too, Sweet Little 16. Every cover in here is really solid. The instrumentation is amazing, the production is really good too, even though John Lennon tends to perform this track way more aggressively than he's supposed to, because we saw in his work with the Beatles that he was able to perform a rock and roll cover without, overdoing it. In this album he kind of does. And that is the reason why it's so low on the list, that and because he didn't write any of the songs, obviously, so it's not an important release for John Lennon, it didn't push him forward in the songwriting journey. But apart from that, I think that the way these tracks are performed, even though they're very John Lennon-like, especially John Lennon from the 70s, I think that maybe a more melodic approach would have been better. But then again, what do I know? It's a really good collection of songs. It's not a lot more to say about this album because, again, it's a covers album, but some of my favorites, once again, Stand By Me, Rip It Up, Ain't That a Shame, and Peggy Sue. And actually, if you consider the fact that this album was released at the beginning of his 5-year hiatus, is even better because he went back to the beginnings before he decided to make a stop in his career, so that's kind of cool. Number 7. You know what comes to mind when I think of John Lennon's solo career? Wasted Potential. Milk and Honey was released in 1984. It was released 4 years after John Lennon's assassination, and a lot of people thought this was just a cash grab, a way for people to capitalize on the popularity of John Lennon. But honestly, once the album was released, people saw that it had a lot of great compositions. Songs like I'm Stepping Out, I Don't Want to Face It, Nobody Told Me, Borrowed Time, My Little Flower Princess as well. So many great songs. And honestly, if you were to put these songs with the songs from Double Fantasy, you'd have one of John Lennon's best solo releases, which is why it's such a shame that Yoko Ono is in this album. I don't know why they couldn't just separate their careers and make albums on their own. And believe me, no hate towards Yoko Ono. I don't know her as a person, I only know her as an artist, and every time I see her, every time she's involved in a John Lennon project, at least when it comes to vocals, it makes the music worse. And that's a fact, because Sleepless Nights, Let Me Count the Ways, there are songs that are not good. The performance is not good. She's not staying in tune with the melody. I know that that's kind of her whole thing, she's an anti-art artist. She doesn't want to be in tune with the melody. She doesn't want to sound like everyone else sounds, but that's not what John Lennon is doing in this album. John Lennon subscribed to a different type of music, a more relaxing, uplifting tunes that made this stage in his career so wholesome for us fans, because we felt like we were finally seeing a happy version of John Lennon. In previous albums, it always sounded like he was depressed, he was going through some issues. In this one, he finally found peace, and Yoko Ono is in between the whole thing, making it sexual, making it weird with this vocal inceptions that I don't really understand why she made this decision. And especially since this is a posthumous album, John Lennon was not alive when this album was released. Why not just release his songs? Why not just release the music he made? Why do you have to be in the mix? I don't know. Why don't you make an album on your own? John Lennon did not approve of this. It's really hard for me to put this album so low on the list because, again, it has some of my favorite songs by him. Borrowed Time, Nobody Told Me, and Forgive Me My Little Flower Princess. If I were to make a top 20 John Lennon solo songs, they would definitely be there. That's the quality, that's the level of quality the songs in this album enjoy. But because you have Yoko Ono every few tracks ruining the whole thing, this is not an enjoyable listen. I don't listen to this album at all. I've listened to it maybe 3 times in my entire life, and one of them was when I was doing the research to make this video. So, it's not really enjoyable. well as a whole listen, and because of that I have to put it so low on the list. If you're a John Lennon fan, don't skip on the songs he released for this album because they're really, really good. They're really similar to what he was doing in Double Fantasy, you know, pop rock tunes that are just pure ear candy. So that's reason enough for a fan to visit this album and to explore what he was doing in here. And if you can kind of ignore Yoko and get it out of the way in a corner of your mind, then maybe you'll enjoy this album way more than me, but I'm just unable to do so, so it falls to number 6. Putting Walls and Bridges at number 5 is probably the biggest plot twist in this video. My memories with this album were way more positive. I thought it was going to be in the top 3, but when I went back to it for this video, I realized that a lot of the songs here don't really go anywhere. You know, it's pretty bland songwriting what John Lennon is showcasing here. There are some exceptions. For example, Going Down on Love is a song I really like. I like how the instrumentation evolves. Bless You is a beautiful song. I love the way he uses strings to adorn the instrumentation of the song. You know, you also have one of my favorite, if not my favorite, John Lennon song from his solo discography, Dream Number 9 or Ninth Dream. A psychedelic piece of music that I never thought I'd find in John Lennon's solo discography, because the thing about his solo stuff is that he kind of abandoned everything he did with the Beatles, the psychedelia, the heaviness of a lot of tracks like Your Blues and Everybody's Got Something to Hide Except for Me and My Monkey, Revolution. You don't really find a lot of it in his solo stuff. Actually, his rock and roll roots are almost nowhere to be seen. You have like 1 or 2 rock and roll tunes in every album, and then the rest is just soft rock music for the most part, or acoustic rock music. It is not that I have a problem with it, but it is really weird because this type of songs show that he still had that creative vein in him. You know, he still wanted to do this type of songs. So why he didn't continue to do so, I don't know, but this is clearly the highlight of this album. One of the greatest songs he ever wrote, Dream Number 9, is an amazing piece of music that uses instrumentation, atmosphere, vocal mods to create a song that feels like it's straight out of a dream. You know, even if you include his Beatles stuff, you know, with some of the greatest songs of all time, Strawberry Fields Forever, A Day in the Life, Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds, Tomorrow Never Knows, this song still would rank very high in that list if I were to make a list about it. So that's the only reason why this album is higher, because you do have songs like Surprise Surprise, Scared or Scarred, I don't know, because he uses the term differently. What You Got is probably the worst song on this album. Nobody Loves You When You're Down and Out. I know that for some people, after his assassination, this songs may be a little more significant for them because of the lyrics, and if you understand what was happening in John Lennon's life when he was recording this album, you know, the whole immigration thing with the US, this was also recorded during a time of separation between him and Yoko Ono, so a lot of things were going through his mind. I understand that, but that's no excuse to release a set of songs that felt like they weren't finished, you know, like they're just ideas, they're not fully fledged songs, and the one that actually are, or that feel completely finished, are the highlights of this album. Whatever Gets You Through the Night with Elton John would be another good example, you know, songs that actually feel like they were conceived and they were worked on. You know, a lot of the other songs in here are just melodies that he came up with, and he decided to make an entire song with that melody in mind without adding anything to it. That's how a lot of this album feels, and that is the reason why it falls at number 5. Mind Games finds itself in number 4, and I have to say that in my opinion this album is very underrated. It has some of my favorite songs by John Lennon, like the title track, for example. You also have Intuition. Amazing pieces of songwriting, you know, that show that John Lennon had the potential to make one of the greatest albums from the 70s. After Imagine and after Plastic Ono Band, he still had a lot of good music in him, but it seems like he was making the albums for the wrong reason. Walls and Bridges was conceived out of the 18-month separation he had with Yoko Ono, and Mind Games was conceived at the very beginning of that separation. He was going through some problems with her. She decided to make her own album, so John Lennon said, you know what, let me do an album too, and actually a lot of the songwriting for this record was completed in a week. I'm pretty sure in the history of music there's a lot of albums that were completed in less than a week, you know, or at least the songwriting was completed in less than a week, and they came out great. But that doesn't mean that's going to be the case for every album that's completed in a week, you know, and this album is the perfect example because you have good ideas. Tight Ass is a really nice tune. One Day at a Time is also really good. Bring On the Lucy, Only People, I Know, a song that's very emotional and a lot of people say it was dedicated to Paul McCartney. How wholesome. You Are Here is also a beautiful track. Actually, most of the songs in this album are beautiful, have really nice melodies. The production is So if I think the instrumentation is good, if I think the melodies are nice, if I think the performances are decent, why is it that this album is so low? Why isn't it in the top 3? Well, the thing is that even though there's a lot of good things in this album, there's nothing great. You know, we're talking about John Lennon. The bar is set quite high, so a good album is not enough to bring it all the way up to the top 3. Because me saying that I like some of the tunes in this album, it doesn't necessarily mean that I love them. You know, I can listen to them if I'm in the car, but paying attention to the lyrics and the melody and how they go nowhere, a lot of the problems that Walls and Bridges have are also found in this album. The tracks don't evolve, you know, they don't change at no point during the track, so it feels very bland and very, you know, dry most of the time. It doesn't feel like they were inspired in any grand idea. It's just like John Lennon found a nice melody and decided to make an entire 4-minute song out of that melody without adding any spice to it, any flavor. Plus, it seems like his lyrical ability was kind of falling short by this album because he wasn't able to make lyrics that kind of matched the tempo of the song. So a lot of the times you have some really claustrophobic singing, like he needs to say the line but he doesn't have enough time to say it because he couldn't connect the words properly. That's something that happens really often in this album too. I'm being a little harsh, I know I'm coming across as hater, but I'm not. I love John Lennon, and again, a lot of the songs here are quite enjoyable, but I have really high standards for John, and this album just doesn't really meet them for the most part because they're only nice tunes. There's nothing too great about them. John Lennon's not making a statement with this album, so that is the reason why it falls in number 4. Now we go with the heavy hitters. You know, this is where it gets good. Double Fantasy finds itself in number 3, and even though it has a whole lot of Yoko in it still, and you know, if you follow this channel and if you've paid attention to the video, you know that that's not exactly my cup of tea. I have to say, even Yoko has some really good tunes in this one. You know, Kiss Kiss Kiss, even though it's a little too sexual, I don't really like the sounds of her moaning and all these like sexual references that are found in the song. It's a nice tune, you know, it's enjoyable, it matches the energy of the album. Yes, I'm Your Angel has some of her most beautiful vocal performances, at least in her work with John, because once you go to her solo albums, you do find a lot of great performances, which again made me frustrated because that means that all the time that she was screaming with this nonsense-like performances, she was doing it out of choice because she was able to perform normally as a normal fucking human. And then you have Beautiful Boys. I don't think there's anything that special about this track. It's just a nice tune, but once you jump into John Lennon, once we get into the heavy hitters of this album, just like Starting Over, one of John Lennon's best songs, one of the most romantic songs ever, the stripped down version, or you know, the raw version released for this song is beautiful. I like it even more than the original version. You do have some tunes that are not exactly up to par with some of the other songs in this album, like Clean Up Time and I'm Losing You. They're not necessarily bad, just not as good as other songs here, like Watching the Wheels, Beautiful Boy, Darling Boy, Woman. Remember what I said when I was doing Milk and Honey? I said that if you take the songs from this album and the ones from Milk and Honey and you put them in one album, only John Lennon songs, you're gonna have one of his best releases. I meant it because his songwriting is that good in this album. Again, Watching the Wheels, Woman, and Just Like Starting Over are some of my favorite songs by John Lennon, and it's honestly a waste that he was assassinated when he was, because I'm pretty sure that we would have seen the best version of John Lennon in the 80s. He was finally happy, he was finally at peace. You know, that's what this album tells you. It's so refreshing listening to the lyrics. Pure love, pure romanticism here. You know, there's no politics, there's no mental health problems. You know, it seems like John Lennon finally understood who he was and what he was supposed to do while he was alive, and honestly, the fact that it was cut short by such a fucking piece of shit is one of the biggest losses that music ever suffered. You know, I would die to see another John Lennon project, a song that comprises all of the ideas he had in 1980, because again, it's not only the songs from this album and Milk and Honey, there's a lot of demo tapes, you know, that were released in the Anthology project by the Beatles, or the Now and Then song, for example, that was released recently as the last Beatles song. So there was a lot of ideas in John Lennon's mind in this time of his life, and you know, it's a shame that it was cut short, but at least we have these beautiful pieces of music, and maybe that's the reason why I'm able to ignore Yoko and even appreciate her contributions in this album, because I feel so happy for John. You know, the fact that he was able to find this domestic happiness, you know, baking bread like Paul McCartney says, raising his son, coming to terms with all the fame and all the problems he had in the past with things like politics and drugs and mental health. You know, it seems like we finally have a version of John Lennon that was healed and was ready to move on with life, you know. So that is the reason why this is a really special album for me. I listen to this record quite often, or you know, to be honest, I listen to the song songs from John Lennon in this album quite often. I'm not in the mood to listen to Yoko Ono all the time, but for the most part, I feel like this album is very, very overhated because of the presence of Yoko Ono here. I think that people had to stop being so blinded by the hate towards this woman and actually acknowledge that there's some good tunes by her in this one too. So yeah, number 3 definitely deserves it. Let's go on with the next one. Putting Imagine in number 2 feels wrong. I mean, this is clearly the biggest success as a songwriter that John Lennon ever enjoyed in his solo career. You have some of his best songs: How Do You Sleep, Imagine, How, Give Me Some Truth, I Don't Want to Be a Soldier. It was a mix between his political side and the melodies from the Beatles that we all enjoyed, and that is the reason why this album is so celebrated. You know, the title track Imagine is seen as one of the biggest hymn for peace of all time, and you know, actually if you Google the greatest song ever made, you're probably going to find Imagine being at number 1. Obviously, you know, it's not only because of the quality of the song itself, because there's nothing too special about Imagine other than the lyrics and how beautiful it is, but also because of what it was used for. You know, I do love the lyrics, and even though John Lennon went on to criticize the way that a lot of the things he said in this album when it comes to the political side of his music was so sugar-coated, he didn't like that it was so melodic and pretty when it's not supposed to be. It's supposed to represent a very dark and ugly side of the world, but in my opinion, this is the right approach. You know, you sugarcoat things a little bit so people pay attention, and you'll be able to make a change. You also have tracks like Oh My Love, which is one of his most beautiful tracks, beautiful lyrics. I love how vulnerable he portrays himself in this song. Jealous Guy is also an amazing, very honest track when you look at the lyrics. It was originally written in 1968, I think, and during his time in India. I believe the song was called Child of Nature, and I think that if you go to a certain deluxe version of the White Album, I don't even know which one because there's so many, you can hear a demo of the song, of the original version of the song. And even though this album is a bit of a mess, especially when you look at the sound palette of the record, you know, it's pretty clear that this is not the most cohesive John Lennon album. Every song is produced differently, his voice sounds different, the instrumentation is different, and the songwriting is different. Like, there's not a lot of things that connect the songs in this album. I feel like the fact that every single song here is an A+ track, this is definitely the most solid track list in John Lennon's discography, is more than enough of a reason to put it at number 2. An amazing album, one of the greatest albums of all time, one of my personal favorites, thanks to songs like Oh My Love, How Do You Sleep, How, and Imagine. This album more than deserves the silver medal, and I would put it at number 1 if it weren't because the album we're talking about next is by far his biggest statement and the most influential one. But if you make your own list and you put Imagine at number 1, I honestly couldn't argue against it because it's definitely the John Lennon album. But it's not the best one. I mean, I think we all knew when we clicked on this video which album was going to be at number 1. Plastic Ono Band is not only John Lennon's best album, but it's one of the greatest releases of all time. One of the most influential ones too, one of the biggest statements ever made in the history of music, because after leaving the Beatles, you know, it seemed like the other band members were enjoying the freedom that leaving the band meant for them, you know, especially George Harrison. Paul McCartney was able to try all his quirky ideas in McCartney 1, Ram, and Wildlife. Ringo was starting to see some protagonism in albums like Sentimental Journey in his 1973 release, but John Lennon was different. He kind of used his freedom to explore his inner demons and what was going wrong with his life and kind of deal with the trauma he had been dealing with ever since he was a child, out of losing his dad and his mom. Even though I don't know the nature of the therapy he was doing that inspired this album, you know, I know that it's called Primal Therapy. It had to have been really intense because the level of pain, anger, and frustration you can feel in his voice throughout this whole listen is insane. You know, in tracks like Mother, I Found Out, Well, but you also see him at moments of clarity where he seems to understand what he has to do with his life in order to move on, in songs like Love, Look at Me, Remember, Isolation. You know, it's very intense, a very intense emotional experience. I personally relate to a lot of these tracks, not because it went through something similar to what he went through, but because I think everyone can relate to the feeling of needing to scream, you know, needing to let it out. And when you can't do that on your own, you know, because of whatever is happening in your life right now, this album can really help you express yourself without needing to scream yourself, you know, because John Lennon is doing the screaming for you, and it allows you to rest. And that is the reason why the flow of this album is so effective, because you have a really throat-crushing song like Mother, for example, that it's beautiful and sad at the same time, but at the very end, you know, you can feel the screaming and the pain behind his voice. And then you have a song like Hold On, which is very melodic, very beautiful, very relaxing. And then I Found Out, once again, a really intense songs. And then Working Class Hero, even though it's political and it has a really dark message behind it, it's still very much low key compared to the other compositions in this album. Then you go from Remember, which again is fast paced and intense, to Love, beautiful, meditational. Well, a song where, you know, the guitar is sharp and it's ugly and John Lennon screams for 6 minutes. And then you go to Look at Me, beautiful guitar arpeggio, beautiful song, you know. And then you go to God, which is in my opinion one of the best, if not the best song that John Lennon ever put out. You know, the level of clarity that he enjoys in this song is incredible. How he closes the chapter, it seems like he gave fans closure with this song, which is something none of the other Beatles did. You know, he told everyone, you know, it was nice, you know, the dream was amazing, it was a good experience, but now I have to move on. The dream is over. I don't believe in anyone but myself and my wife, and that's pretty much it. You know, that's the end of it. I do have my problems with this album, you know, even though I understand that the ugliness and the rawness of a lot of the elements that are found in the songs are a key part of the overall experience of the album. I do think the guitar playing is very clumsy, very unappealing. You know, I don't really enjoy my time listening to the guitar playing in this album in a lot of the songs, especially I Found Out and Well. Songs that play a really important role in the album. For the most part, they succeed at playing that role, but when you do pay attention to the instrumentation, you know, when you focus on every element of the album, you can tell that the guitar playing didn't need it to be that bad, you know, because it's bad. But that's just me, you know, looking at little details that I don't like about the album. But for the most part, this is one of the greatest albums of all time, one of the most potent and important musical statements ever. The level of influence this album had in the music industry, especially in the singer-songwriter scene, it gave artists a beacon, you know, to follow. Because people like Bob Dylan, David Bowie, and Lou Reed were already using a different style of performing, but no one was even close to doing what John Lennon did with Plastic Ono Band, and that inspired a lot of people to try and do their own types of songwriting, you know. So because of how legendary this album is and how important it was for the music industry and how important it was for John Lennon himself, you know, because this album is pretty much him going through therapy, I have to put it at number one. There's no other album that should go at number one. It does have some of his most legendary songs. Again, Mother, Hold On, Remember, Love, God, one of his best songs, you know, so no other album should go at number one other than Plastic Ono Band.
No short head, yellow belly, it's on a trick. Come on, you.
But of course, that is only my personal opinion. I'm pretty sure you guys have your own. So instead of complaining in the comments section, why don't you go ahead and give me your own list so I can take a look at it. I can give you my opinion on your list and you can give me your opinion on my list, and we can all have a wonderful conversation in the comment section. I have to say, I really enjoyed making this video. I love every opportunity I can get to go back to John Lennon's solo discography because he's one of my favorites of all time, you know. Even though I was very critical about a lot of these albums, that doesn't really mean I don't like them or that I think they're bad. Most of the time it's just that the bar is set really high for John Lennon. You know, he was not only an amazing solo artist, but he was a part of the greatest discography of all time. So naturally, you know, my expectations are kind of high when it comes to him. I do hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, go ahead and leave a like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any other videos that I upload. If you want me to talk about any other topics related to music, if you want me to check out a song, album, or artist, leave it down below as well, and I'll make sure to read it and fulfill your requests as soon as I can. Once again, I hope that you guys enjoyed, and I hope that I can see you soon with a new video. But until then,